Right, okay. Got a few people joining us now, so we'll kick off. So hi everyone, and welcome to this Industry Insider webinar with S4M. We're very delighted to have you all joining us live today. My name's Lauren Wakefield. I'm the Marketing and Industry Programs Director at IAB Europe. And for those of you that don't know, Industry Insider is actually a format that we launched last year to provide real learnings and insights from industry leading companies. We want to be able to present the latest trends and best practices from across the industry. So far, we've looked at topics including brand safety with Group M, creator marketing with TikTok, and most recently, just at the end of last year, we looked at CTV with Magnite. But today, I'm very delighted we've got S4M with us for our first Industry Insider of the year, showing us just how we can prepare for post-lockdown and look to drive more customers to store in 2021. So I'll just share the agenda with you all. So first up, I'll be passing the mic over to Lauren Bigland, who is the VP for Brand Strategy and Communications at S4M. She'll be kicking off the session with an introduction to the state of drive to store and some drive to store best practices. We'll then be moving over to a panel which Lauren will be moderating, where she'll be joined by Christophe Collet, who's CEO S4M, François-Xavier Pierrel, who is Chief Data Officer at JCDecaux, and our very own Chief Economist from IAB Europe, Daniel Knapp. So they'll be discussing and looking at the future of brick and mortar and just how combining advertising channels can help lead to better business results. And we will then finish up with an audience Q&A. So just on that note, before I do hand over to Lauren, you should be able to see on your interface that we have got a Q&A box there. So if you have any questions for the panel that you'd like Lauren to ask, you can post those in there. As I mentioned, this is a live event, so we do really encourage you to post those questions, and hopefully we'll get round to as many of them as possible. We are also recording this event, so we will be sharing that with you all afterwards. But with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand over to Lauren.
Perfect, thank you so much. Let me just share my screen with you all. So yeah, thanks again for the introduction. Thank you everyone who has logged on to join us today to discuss advertising post lockdown. So we'll try and not say the COVID word too many times in the next kind of hour of this session. But obviously it has changed advertising, it's changed the way that brands are working potentially forever. And now as we look ahead to a vaccine, as we move into the summer, it's a really important time to pause as an advertising industry and take stock of where we are and what does the future look like going forward into 2021 and beyond. So over the past few years, bricks and mortar retailers have faced what we're calling kind of triple threats. So they've had the rise of traditional kind of e-commerce, so the likes of Amazon, taking more market share, moving more purchases from offline to online. There's also been the rise of the D2C brands who are often operating at very low margin. They're not having to shell out for these big physical locations, paying a lot of money on renting and on having all of their stock available at one time. And then of course there has been COVID-19 with those forced closures while still continuing to pay the very high rents. So it has been a bit of a difficult time. It doesn't perhaps seem like a very positive outlook, but there is positive news on the horizon. So pre-pandemic, 89% of sales still happened in brick and mortar stores. So actually the perception that we have, that perhaps is in the headlines that we read about a lot, that online is taking a huge share of offline sales is a little bit exaggerated. 90% of all of our purchases were still happening offline in those physical stores before the pandemic. And obviously things have changed now. So I think we all know people who have switched to online shopping who might never have done so before. So perhaps your grandparents might be doing their weekly shop online. Perhaps you're ordering things online that normally you would have always gone to try out. Perhaps it's a bed, perhaps it's a car. but also that we're seeing that consumers are really willing to return. So this image is of an IKEA in London that reopened over the summer. Now, if you think about IKEA, they sell all of their products nearly online. That is available. It was open during the initial waves of the pandemic for people to order from, yet people were still willing to queue for up to 4 hours to go and have that physical in-store retail experience. So we know that the demand for consumers is there. People want to have a physical store to go to. People want that experience. And it's really up to us as advertisers, as the advertising industry, to make sure that we are supporting those physical brands with those store locations and helping them drive more consumers into those stores. Because what we need from society are thriving shops, busy car dealerships. So we want to have those experiences on our local high street. No one wants to see a kind of empty high street and poorly performing store locations. So with that in mind, we have worked on creating a drive to store handbook. So this is essentially a very practical guide, and it covers everything that you might need to know when looking to drive customers into a store location. It looks at audience targeting, it looks at which channels you should use, so using mobile but also out of home, using audio, how to measure a campaign, how long you should measure your campaign for, and basically gives you all the tips and tricks to be able to effectively drive more customers into your physical locations. So it's available to download via the QR code here, but we'll also be sharing it around with anyone who's opted into S4M communications, or if you haven't and you would like it, please feel free to reach out and we're happy to send it to you. It features case studies from McDonald's, Volkswagen, Dr. Oetker, Burberry, Nando's, Botanic in France, and many others. So it's a real good source of advice for you. And it also has information from JCDecaux, who's joining us as a panelist later, on how combining your mobile and out of home strategies can actually increase visits to your store by 2.5 times compared to using those channels alone. And it also features an introduction from Daniel Knapp, the IAB's chief economist, who's going to be joining us on the panel as well. So it really is a good read. It looks at the future of retail. So please feel free to download and have a look. So I think we're ready to dive into the panel. So I think if you want to add our panelists up to the screen. Perfect, there's Daniel.
Hello, everyone.
Perfect. Hi there. Hi, Daniel. How are you?
Hi, Lauren. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Well, I think just while we wait for Christophe and there we have. Hi, Christophe. How are you?
Very good, and yourself?
Very well.
Can you see me?
We can see. I can see you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So I think while we just wait for François-Xavier to join us, we can perhaps start on the first question, which I think is
Don't you see me, Lauren?
Ah, there you are. How are you?
Cool. I'm good, and you?
Very well, thank you. And you have a perfect background, I think, very on message.
Yeah.
We'll have to get some of those. So the first question that we want to look at today is really, why are the physical shopping spaces still so important to not only the consumer but the retailer as part of their journey?
I can take this one. Just because even post-COVID, almost 90% of the physical of the sales are still happening in physical stores. So even if the consumer journey and COVID have changed a lot of things and a lot of way and that retailers need to handle the customer journey, people are still going to physical stores and are still willing to do it, especially because we all have in our families or friends some Saturday afternoon shoppers, lovers. So I think physical stores are still where you are buying things because you are trying them, etc., etc.
Exactly, and just to add what Christophe said, I just recently crunched the data at IAB Europe. There's lots of statistical data now available, of course, on the explosion of e-commerce. But if we factor out this massive surge we saw in the kind of first 3 months, after the lockdown, we can still see in the UK, which is a leading retail market, only 20% of all sales are e-commerce, and in the US it's even less. Before COVID, just around 11-12% of all retail transactions were actually e-commerce. So there is a key role for the physical experience. And if we do some extrapolations, of course, we can see e-commerce is growing rapidly, but there will be likely a readjustment of this e-commerce surge once lockdowns are being lifted. And the haptic experience of seeing things in the store, the spontaneity of going into the store, also the store as a cultural experience is so deeply anchored into our consumer society that it's incredibly hard to dispense of. So stores will be a mainstay for the future, and there will be likely more kind of hybrid and interesting, innovative retail concepts emerging based on the things we've learned in this pandemic.
And do you have any view of what those hybrid concepts are going to look like beyond the very traditional, online stays online and offline stays online offline models?
I think when I wrote the introduction for your report, I kind of did a bit of research on kind of general retail trends. I think the first thing just to bear in mind is that the store as we know it is a fairly recent phenomenon. So before that, it emerged actually in the UK around 200 years ago. Before there were kind of market stalls, etc. Then we had the move from the kind of small corner shop to the big mall experiences. Then we had more kind of high curated experiences where we saw, in particular, think of fashion, for instance, where hairdressers and coffee shops were integrated into the store. So the store itself has always been a very fluid concept that needed to react to consumer tastes and demands. And we're going to see that in the future as well. So one thing we've seen in the lockdown is, of course, the pick up from the physical store. We've seen some of the earliest brands were actually, if you think of Tesla and others, that have put shops, car dealerships in a sense, micro car dealerships in extremely central urban locations where there never were before, where you go, where you browse, etc. You may inform yourself online, but you go into the store in a kind of online, offline hybrid experience. Other things that are happening is, if you look at D2C brands, which are digitally native, which live in the virtual world per definition, they've started to realize in order to get relevant market share, number one, they need to be on the physical store shelf. Think of Harry's, the shaving brand, best example. Online only, now you can get it in the supermarkets. Other D2C brands are thinking about, if we want to sell, the website isn't enough. We need consumers to look and touch and feel our product. So they're kind of gallery-like curational stores opening as a kind of concept store for such D2C brands where people browse and see the product. They might buy it online later on, but the physical store has become a key pillar in a purchase journey for digital first brands. And I think these things are kind of very exciting, and we're going to see more of this in the post-19 world.
I thought it was interesting actually that you mentioned about urban areas, and Christophe and François-Xavier, I don't know if there is a trend with brands looking at the different physical locations and the different environments and coming up with different concepts for those areas. So maybe having a different concept within a more rural area, and then within an urban area having something completely different, and then looking at implementing different strategies to each of those individual stores.
I'll go ahead.
You want to go, Christophe? Okay,
no, go ahead.
Okay, I'll jump on this one. But what is sure is that on the short term, most of the companies have been affected by the recent period. So investment will be very much scrutinized more than before. So I believe in the emergence of new concept, that's for sure. But I think there will be an appetite to take advantage of the previous investment. So I don't see like huge concept, crazy concept coming out. I think more about the people being very smart about how they are going to bridge the online world with the offline world to take advantage of everything they already invested in. And I think there will be more about an experience point of view. What people will look for will be an experience with probably fewer shops, with a better quality, better engagement, and especially an omni-channel approach towards the experience. You can see whatever is the industry, you will be looking to bridge what you are investing online, which is where people can discover product and this kind of stuff, and how they are going to engage with smelling, touching, discovering the product. And I think on the very first wave of this transformation, it would be first about security. I think we are all very stressed or maybe reassured now that we have all these dispositives. But the second wave of this one will be, how do you make the experience better, more personalized? And as a consumer, I would be potentially looking at fewer brands, but brands I really care about, where I feel aligned with their aspiration of the moment, and they offer me something that really drives me into the store. And then you can think about many brands. If you think about Nike, the way they sell the shoes, Adidas, how Cartier, when you are buying a ring or this kind of stuff, the experience they promote is something that you cannot replace with the online world. And I think there will be an hybridation of concept between on and off, but I don't see the kind of dilemma you were asking for coming so soon into the reopenings.
We can take Nespresso. It could be a good example, because Nespresso is driving people to the boutique for having customers trying the coffee and all the experience, and then to recruit online members. People who are gonna order on weekly, monthly basis some caps. So I think and Apple was doing the same with the Apple Store. Apple Store was not a place where Apple wanted to sell a lot of product. The Apple Store was a place where Apple wanted people to try the product and to buy them online afterwards. So I think this is what we see today. I think what COVID brings to the table is a more complex customer journeys than ever. So they are going online, they are going offline. Well, when we started, let's say 20 years ago, you were looking maybe on the internet and then you were buying everything offline. Now, after it went, you were looking online, then you were coming to the shop and you were using some comparators just to check if the price was good one, etc. So now the customer journey, is even more complex, and brands have to handle that reality. Then after the other thing we can bring is that every store is different. So you don't sell the same product if you are in London or in Paris or in the countryside, etc. So I think brands have also to adapt themselves to local. And that's maybe the second part of your question, is how they can customize local customer experience and also the local marketing to attract people. Because if I take an example, you don't sell the same product to a Parisian than to someone who lives in the countryside, and someone in the countryside will not react to the same media. So maybe in Paris they would be very fond of social search, etc., where in the countryside they would be more they will react more to traditional media, out of home, local radio, local press, etc. So that's something what we can bring onto the table, and that brands will have to adapt also, is to this new reality, which is local over global, for just a right purpose.
I think it's interesting. We all talk about this hybridization of experience, kind of online and offline, and I think what's often overlooked is that the psychology of shopping is very different in the offline world than in the online world. If you think, for instance, of discovery, many websites have invested a lot in product discovery. Usually when you drive to store online based on an ad, you are much more rational and specific about your purchase. Whereas in an offline world, experience, discovering new products, discovering other things you didn't intend to look at, it can be curated in, with the array of all the different senses, height of the shelves, promotional placements, etc. So in a sense, these are creative opportunities that websites only do not necessarily afford. And there's another thing to bear in mind. Online shopping will grow inevitably. We all know that. But there was a time before the stores closed that everybody thought, well, advertising in Shopify is the new rent. So instead of paying rent in a store, invest in that kind of stuff. Now, what we have seen is that the customer acquisition cost for pure e-com have grown massively. So Christophe, you mentioned Nespresso. It does work well for subscription products, but the competition for consumer attention and the drive to online conversion only, it's getting incredibly expensive. And for many product categories, it doesn't give an ROI. So in a sense, to put a pun on this, rent is the new rent. A physical store allows conversion rates that are higher and potentially cheaper than if you just, like everybody else, followed the online-only route.
And actually, it's interesting you mentioned that impulse purchase or that impulse buy. And I think, François-Xavier, that must be something that you understand really well, as in, you're seeing a really well-placed advert as you walk past on your way home, you're going into that store, or you're making a change in your behavior.
Yeah, definitely. And this is why when we moved forward with Christophe and S4M, the combination of mobile and OH was really for us a way to take the best of both worlds. And I'm phasing what Daniel just said. I think it's never been that expensive or that hard to get attention on the Facebook ecosystem or the Google ecosystem. There is so much stuff to look at, so many information, so much content to consume, that if you are a brand, you are diluted into a newsfeed or into the scroll habit. And I think having this capacity to engage the brand with the physical network that OH can provide, and JCDecaux more specifically, and having this capacity with mobile and with S4M as our partner to amplify, to deliver a complementary message, and to help driving to store, whatever is your vertical. You can sell shoes, you can sell clothes, you can sell food. This combination works very well. And actually, we were very surprised by the fact that combining OH and mobile, initially, we were really looking at global brands and national brands. And actually, we had such a good response for very local brand that we're looking at getting access to mobile content and mobile amplification and marketing, but thought it was too hard, too complex, too expensive. And actually, it really opened up our minds to, we can think about the global brand, but this is one way in this context to help also local brands to find a way to talk to their audiences. So for us, it's really like taking the best of both worlds to combine OH capillarity and networks, which is about attention and reach, and having capacity to trigger the mobile at the moment you think it's the best one, to drive people to store, having a physical experience and engaging with the product and the brand.
And it's much more in the way that consumers actually behave. So, it's that thing, you're seeing something on the television, you're seeing something on your mobile device. As you walk down the high street, you're seeing the out-of-home advert. So it's really, evolving into the consumer, as opposed to just looking at people in silos and in specific channels of mobile can achieve X and then out-of-home can achieve Y. Actually, consumers aren't wired that way. So why should our advertising be?
It's a good combination as well, just because it's the same formats. So you are seeing those formats on the street, and you are seeing the same format and the same ad on mobile. So that's important. And just because we're able, thanks to mobile, to redesign also the catchment areas for every POI by affinity, we're able also to match the network of panels, and just to make sure that only people who are keen at some point, it's all a question of probability, of course, but are keen to come to your store will see the ad. So the combination of both will have a positive impact, because it's just a repeated message, but to the right person. So we are increasing the foot traffic.
Yeah, and echoing what Christophe said, I mean, why should you limit your brand to display on 5 inches screens? This is cool. You can micro target and one-to-one conversation, and the dream that had been sold over the last 5-7 years, and I was part of it in previous life. But the truth is that you can combine 2 square meters, 8 square meters, and also having the capacity to engage with smaller screens with more precision. And I think the best combination is really a mix of this all together, and really following how consumers engage with brands.
And to go that way, I think drive to store is not one media is a combination of media, and the combination of media and the media mix is and has to be different per store, because again, you are not audiences are not reacting the same way depending on the stores. So it's sometimes it's and that's why we have also this it works pretty well for local brands, just because it's out of home is also a hyper local media like mobile.
And I think we've seen the trend towards local and staying local really accelerates. There's obviously been a bit of drive towards it over the last year or so, because it's more economically friendly and also good for the environment if you're buying from your local stores. And that has accelerated with the pandemic. Do you think more brands are looking towards having local strategies as opposed to one big national branding campaign?
I think on this one, I'm just looking for the out-of-home media. A few years ago, we didn't have the capacity to go at that level. It was harder. We were having a hard time getting access to data. And now we can actually execute these kind of strategies where you can really slice it to the level you wish. It doesn't mean that we'll go one-to-one into the conversation. First, this is not the destination of this media. I would say I would leave it to Google or to Facebook to drive this kind of a one-to-one conversation or online media. But we are moving from mass media to a more personalized media at the scale of our capacity of execution. But we now have the capacity to go local very easily and to combine data we own, data we aggregate with other media and other support like mobile, like S4M and other partners we have on other support.
And I think one of the interesting things about out of home, when we realize, of course, now we got the digital screens, digital out of home, massive in France, in Germany, has been really taking off in recent years. We can adjust the message based on time of day, based on commuter traffic, weather, and so forth. So there is much more targeting possible. But I think in the online world, we as an industry have often made the mistake of over-targeting, being over-granular, being intrusive. And I think what's really nice about out of home is that many of these kind of third-party cookie debates that we have, they don't really apply, because you use geospatial data on, let's say, population density, on how many people pass through a location, who these people are in aggregate and so forth, to apply to the screen, because the screen, it's a mass medium in itself. Or let's say, in a sense, a micro mass medium, because it doesn't target individually. So a lot can be done with data that isn't intrusive and by its very definition, privacy compliant. And I think that is likely going to drive kind of more data cautious and privacy conscious advertisers to embrace the targeting mechanisms of such media.
And I couldn't agree more. And I think the last point is also a shift to value for money. After the pandemic, after any crisis, advertisers are looking for more return on investment on their media spend. And what we can bring here is also the capacity to measure and to measure the foot traffic. So saying you have spent €1, this is we brought you this this cost per incremental visit. So because we're able to track the incrementality, so visits were really related to the ad, both from the out of home and from mobile. And that's something I think brands will look at, just because 2020 was terrible for a lot of them, and they don't have the same marketing budget, and they will need to invest to bring back people to the store, and they would need to be cautious on the ROI.
Which is, sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
So I can see both things emerge. Some very cost-conscious brands might just say, let's do the bare minimum, let's do that national scattergun strategy. But if you're smart and want to get market share, you need a more differentiated approach. And what we've seen, look at if we talk about digital advertising, let's include out of home in that as well, digital out of home. What were the primary underwriters of that economy in 2020? So why did the digital ad market not collapse in contrast to other media? It wasn't necessarily the big advertisers, the big brand advertisers, but it was the SMBs. It was the ones kind of local or regional advertisers who realized that they need advertising in order to survive. And for those, advertising sits somewhere else on the balance sheet. it's not just a expenditure that can be cut, but it's seen as an investment, because they realize that without sales, or without advertising, there isn't sales. And while that has primarily happened kind of in the social platform world at scale, I believe in 2021, we will see similar patterns also in the offline-online hybrid world.
It's interesting that you mentioned the small, medium businesses and continuing to advertise maybe through a pandemic, even though, you know, they might think batten down the hatches and not invest. Because they can very easily feel the difference of an advertising campaign. If you're a small business and you spend some money on advertising, you'll immediately see if that is working based on the number of people going to your site or the number of people placing an order. You know, you've got a very real-time feedback point there as a small business. And perhaps that's what brands, as they become larger, start to miss out on, because they perhaps aren't able to track as effectively the return that's being generated by that advertising. And I think there are obviously different reasons for that. And one of the reasons that digital has taken off so much in the, you know, beyond that people are using screens, is because you can track it back to a click or a download or a purchase online. So you have that feedback loop as well. And perhaps where we're starting to see in the next evolution of advertising is taking those offline medias and offline actions like a store visit and being able to track that and being able to kind of prove the return on investment. And perhaps that will change attitudes to, you know, when you're actually seeing this money that's being invested directly translating into people through the door, that will shift brands' opinions.
I think that's a really interesting point, Lauren, where, you know, we're seeing digital targeting mechanisms now applying to the brick and mortar world. And I would even go further. If you know how your digital advertising converts and who goes into the store, you do not only measure the ROI of your advertising, but it's actually a vital source of business intelligence data. How valuable is your site location? Where else should you be putting up other sites? So in that world, if we think it further, really innovative brands, for those, that data that they get, be it from JCDecaux, from S4M and others, I wouldn't see that as an endpoint, which just says, okay, check advertising outcome generated, but use it as a starting point for a strategic discussion. And we all know that sometimes in the olden days, the CMO's position at the executive table was sometimes a bit of an outsider position. And armed with such data, a CMO can have much more strategic conversations about building the future of the business. That's what I'm personally most excited about.
If I can make a comparison, when I started to work in 2004, it was already possible to run an ad on the internet, and it was already possible to sell a product on the internet, and it was also possible to track seamless from the ad to the product. But at that time, ROI was crap, and a lot of people and a lot of brands just said, "Okay, internet is crap; it doesn't work." Actually, the customer experience was crap, and it took brands 10 to 15 years to optimize it and to transform, let's say, the digital store into their maybe most profitable store today. And what we bring into the table today is the capacity to bridge the online and the offline world. So because we're able to track seamless from digital ad to physical sales, and vice versa, from a physical ad to digital sales. But this new world, I would say this offline trafficking, it's something pretty new. And I think brands will need to invest just to understand that they can transform their marketing spend into business outcomes.
Yeah, I agree with Christophe and Daniel on this one. Actually, two comments I wanted to deliver. The reason why there is a positive mix between out-of-home media and the online world, and especially mobile, is that it pushes us to deliver against KPI that marketers understand. Initially, it was about reach. Now we can deliver against performance KPIs, which is fairly new for our industry. And this is really a game changer for us. And the second, coming back to what Daniel said, when we focus on the results, we can deliver return on average spend and these traditional KPIs. What we care about, I totally agree, is the insights you get from the campaign that will help you improve the experience you drive into the shop, understanding the peak hours, understanding who went into the shop, how you can cross and match data to understand who actually converted and why others didn't, and how you can improve your next media plan, but mostly the experience into the physical store to make sure people are happy to come back and have a great experience with your brand and your product.
You can go further than that because you can give a real-time performance of your network of store. So you can highlight the one who have some potential, but also other stores who have no potential. So stores you may close to invest your money in other stores or in digital, etc. So this is something we can bring to the table to the head of network, for example.
I think we need to see, I think in the advertising industry, we love to speak about innovation, to throw around the latest buzzwords. But when you look at execution, it's one of the most risk-averse and conservative industries I've ever worked in. And I think as soon as we change the conversation from kind of KPIs and media metrics to business outcomes, to something that the CMO and the CFO understand, once they speak the same language, this can change. Of course, to adopt, it requires some innovator brands because most are doing same and watch and listen. But those innovators have the chance to really make an impact, to increase market share and to completely pioneer how advertising operates. And I think then the industry at large will follow. But in contrast to 10 years ago or 5 years ago, we now have the practical tools in place to make that happen. It just now requires bold, ambitious marketers who believe that, and a CMO and a CFO who look eye to eye and speak the same language.
Couldn't agree more.
Great, so I've just got one more question. I think we'll head to some audience questions. But what are your predictions for 2021? I know that we should be quite conservative with predictions given this time last year. None of us could have predicted what 2020 was going to look like, but give us your best guess. Daniel, do you want to go first?
Well, I'll hold my neck out. So I polished the crystal ball last week because we did the first kind of IAB Europe Economic Trends Forum where I was compelled to make a forecast. And of course, any forecast right now is really built on quicksand, so it will definitely change. One thing, so for the digital ad industry, we saw this massive spike in Q4 2020. And that was some kind of irrational exuberance that we're not seeing in Q1. So there's a bit of conservatism in there, in particular when it comes to upfront commitments. So we are seeing a fairly slow first quarter that in aggregate, all formats combined, probably like +4%, +5%. Q2, just because the comparatives are so easy, because last year was down so much, it's going to grow over 20%. And then we're seeing as demand comes back, kind of some high, I would say high single digit, maybe very low double digit growth towards the tail end of the year. But I believe that we will come back to overall, if nothing changes now with the vaccine schedule, a stronger Q2, which will allow the ad industry, digital ad industry overall in Europe to grow at about +10, +11%. But I'm monitoring the figures very closely and I might change my opinion.
You reserve that right. Christophe, do you want to go next?
I don't want to speak too soon, obviously, and I will make no prediction. But I just want to say to retailers, I think only retailers who are financially strong, agile in response, and let's say adapt themselves to local will emerge as winners. So I think today it's a good chance for them to go more digital, but not digital only to do digital. It's to use digital to improve their physical network and stores and sales.
Perfect. And François-Xavier?
Okay, always better to go last on this kind of forecast. So the one thing I can forecast is when restaurants will be open, we'll have queues, and I'm very happy about it. Same for theaters and stadiums and everything that we're all missing. Yeah, exactly, and we are all missing that these are actually physical moments. So I believe this is a good echo for retailers. I believe people will go back to shop because there is such a porosity. We are all working from home and living from home. There is this porosity between our work life and our personal life. So each time you can get quality moment out of home, going to shop, doing some shopping, going to restaurants with friends or to theaters, it will be something really tremendous to rediscover this kind of stuff. So I believe for retailers, I'm not so worried. And when it comes to out of home industry, I believe programmatic will raise even better, even harder, because this is a very good way to converge on and offline and online world to operate against KPIs, audiences, and data at the same level.
Great, and actually that leads quite nicely into one of the questions that we've received from the audience, which is how do you forecast recovery for the digital out-of-home market in 2021?
Well, there is one evidence: we need people in the streets. So the fewer lockdowns, the better for us. Let's be very honest and transparent on this one. I guess the comment also applies to retailers. So recovery, I kind of share what Daniel said. I mean, we are following the recovery against the general situation. So I believe Q1 will be rough based on the geos, but generally speaking, it's a hard quarter because we have a lack of visibility. Q2 will improve, Q3 even better, and hopefully Q4 will be a very strong Q4. But I believe this is like, we need to relearn all this, but Q1 will be very hard for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Fingers crossed with the vaccine for sure.
Definitely.
One which I think might be more for me to take, as I've actually included some in this presentation, is the QR code back in again. Track and trace systems on mobiles have reminded people and brands just how easy and useful they are. Will brands start using this more, and what other advances do you see? Does anyone else want to weigh in on that, or are you happy for me to take that one?
Go ahead.
Happy for me. So I think QR codes are, really interesting. I've included a couple in this presentation. I think when they first came out, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we just didn't have the technology on as consumers to be able to really take the advantage of them. You had to have a specific app downloaded on your phone that then went out of date. You had to re-download it to be able to then use a QR code to get the information that you wanted. It wasn't that seamless experience that it's meant to be for it to work. And today, when you look at your mobile device, it's super easy to use. Every single camera has it installed as software. You can literally point at it and go, as we've seen with track and trace. When you look at China and some other countries in Asia, the QR code is an absolutely integral part of how brands market there, but also how people pay for things. You literally pay for things by scanning a QR code. It goes directly to your digital wallet, and that's all paid for in a really seamless user experience. So I do think there's a chance of a resurgence there, particularly, if we start to move away from things like cash, things like cards, even more than we have done over the last couple of years. They can represent a really good user experience. I think they could probably do with being jazzed up a little bit. They're not the prettiest thing for you to put on a big advert. And I think brands, especially luxury brands, are going to balk at doing that. But the more innovation we can get there, I definitely think that we'll see more uses for the QR code for sure.
And I think there will be needed
with you,
also to go back to restaurants, because we will need to use them massively.
Mm-hmm.
To track us and to
menus
with the vaccine.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said, guys. And on the out of home front, I would say there is what we are doing with S4M, which is more automated and at scale. But QR is something that, at least from our team, we are pushing very, very hard, because we believe that if there is a good call to action, this is a very good way to drive people to store as well. So QR code, as old as it can seem, it's very interesting for us to drive engagement, and also in some particular cases, it avoids the collection of personal data, which is very interesting as well, to drive to store people without having to collect email and phone numbers and all this kind of stuff.
I think, François-Xavier, what you said about the call to action, I think that's actually on point, because the most consumers don't love brands as much as the marketing industry promotes. It's fairly utilitarian. So we need to be very, very realistic about that. But with the right call to action, I think it's absolutely a value add to consumers. But we need to use it in a strategic way, and not plaster every ad with it. But I also think that we have habitualized so much new behavior in the last year, and there's always this discussion about, will this behavior stick or will it not stick? Well, the jury is out about this, but we also, as an industry, we can engineer that behavior. If we continue in our communication with certain patterns or communication propositions that consumers are now used to, we can keep them engaged in that way. So I think we can, in a sense, manufacture these new behaviors and help consumers maintain them.
Great. And some questions around attribution, which I think ties quite nicely into the personal data and the tracking. How will attribution modeling work, considering the changing consumer journey, online search to in-store experience, to understand the value of integrating out of home and mobile?
So for attribution, which was one of my favorite topic for years, attribution means you need to get access to all your data, to combine them and understand how all this works together. The issue you have today, if I'm not misleading on this one, you have your Google ecosystem and your Facebook ecosystem, which represent 50, 60, 70% for some advertisers. In the end, those guys don't share. You'll get a partial view of the data, and each of them will promote their own model and their own attribution model. So attribution is something that hardly will be solved in time. I believe that working on media mix modeling and something a bit more midterm and long term is potentially having more impact on your decisioning, more than the attribution model, the way we thought about it like 4 or 5 years ago.
And it will be possible also to customize the attribution window, because from a brand to another, the attribution window is totally different. Look, just think about a Big Mac from McDonald's and a Tesla. Its attribution window is different. So that's something you can work on, and you can customize your attribution model. So what I'm saying is an attribution model has to be personalized to your brand. And today you can do it.
And one thing about attribution is also, it needs to be personalized to your brand, but many are worried about how changes in third-party cookies, IDFA and so forth changes that. And well, maybe I have a bit of a controversial opinion on this, but I think we should never look at the past and how attribution worked, but we always have to see what's the currently available toolbox and how can we do the best of that. Because the goal for marketers is always inference, having a conclusion about what consumers do. And they just need to do it not in the scientifically perfect way possible, they need to do it better than their competitors. And if everybody has the same tools, you just need to use the same tools and do things a little bit better. It's about, you need to do it relatively better, not absolutely better. And this is why even with changes in how tracking can happen, there's still a lot of potential. And I'm a big proponent of the notion of experimentation, which you've seen a lot in website design and so forth. The Harvard Business Review dedicated actually April 2020 an entire issue to building a culture of experimentation. And I think, this is, if you take the world of A, B, C, D, E, F, G testing, however you want to call it, if you take that out of the online world into the physical environment and say, if I make some micro adjustment to my campaign, how do flows to the till, flows to the store and to the till, and the retailer always has the till, how does that change? And you can make lots of conclusions in aggregate about how that affects the media strategy. And you do not need individual people's data about this. And I think, so it's it's difficult, it's new to learn, but if you think about if you have the right concepts available, there's a lot you can do with attribution, and you can get really creative with it these days. And maybe you're even people are forced to get more creative with it, and then tailor it to, what do you say, Christophe, personalize it to your brand, rather than using some run-of-the-mill model.
I would say, in addition, it's possible to, let's say, to optimize business outcomes, but that implies that you spend some time and some resource on doing it. It's possible. We have plenty of tools and methodology and personalization, but what we need is not something, let's say, standard. It's has to be personalized, and so that require you to spend some time on doing it.
And to conclude on just one last one on this one, Lauren. Actually, this kind of topic is something we are discussing very regularly with advertisers. And coming back to what Daniel said, it's about experimenting. We know that things are changing so fast and so quickly, improving on one industry and getting harder on another one, that you need to experiment and work side by side to develop something which is actually, I very much agree with the comment, just better than your competitor. So you take better decision and you improve your marketing and your ROI, which is actually an objective that I didn't have in mind, actually not that clearly, but this is the best advice I will take from this session.
Perfect. And I think that's just about all we've got time for. So thank you so much for taking part. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for everyone who sent in questions. I can hand over to Lauren.
Thank you all. That was a really great and insightful session. I think we've all learned quite a lot there about how we can prepare for post-lockdown. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we have recorded this, so we will be sharing that with everybody afterwards. So thank you again for everyone for joining us. And with that, I hope you all have an enjoyable rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Thank you.